Hi, my name's John Cordy, and you seem to have a copious amount of knobs, obviously. I guess regular-ish viewers of the channel will know that I'm into modelers and stuff. My first modelers were Line 6 pods and that sort of thing. Most recently, I tried out the Iridium and the Hotone Ampero and the Headrush gig board. So in terms of loyalty to any one brand, I don't have it. The first thing that I got was the HX Stomp, which I really like. It took me a while to get into, but I'm a big fan of it now. And the Helix. The Iridium, probably where quite a few people who are on the channel know me from. I was quite early to try out that and do quite a lot of videos with it. I'm really impressed with it. I've been a Kemper user for ages. I've got one over there. So the only brand of this modelling stuff, well, not the only, but some of the brands that I've not tried would be like the Amplifier, and then I guess the big one, which is probably one of the big three, you got your big three, is probably Kemper, Helix, and then Axe FX or Fractal Audio. So I ordered this FM3 through my friend Kevin, who was on the wait list. He shipped this over from America. So I've had it now for, about half a day. And I just wanted to give some of my first impressions as like the first time that I've ever come across a Fractal unit. I thought that might be vaguely interesting to some people. If it's not, then fair enough. So I think it might be fair to say there's some kind of polarization in the modelling world. It's important for me to say up front that I don't really have a side in any of this. Yes, I've used Helix and HX Stomp for the longest, but I'm not shy about saying that I also use a Kemper and the Iridium. So there's no kind of bias going into this. What I'm really interested in is what things inspire me to make music. I've said, like, the Headrush gig board I think has a way better pitch shifting capabilities than the Helix. I've said I think it's got a way better looper than the Helix, and I also like the ability to run multiple amps at the same time. There's things that I really like about the Kemper. I think some of the effects in there are great. The Iridium, I think the three models that are included in there kind of rival any other unit in terms of, like a Vox AC30 or a Fender Deluxe Reverb reissue. The one kind of downside to the Iridium, if it is that, would be that you've got kind of a lack of choice comparatively. But most of my time is spent on a Helix or an HX Stomp at this stage. So I got this because I was super interested, and people have been asking me, about Axe FX stuff. So I thought, well, it makes sense to try this smaller unit. Now in terms of size, it is pretty compact. That's the HX Stomp for comparison. Obviously I think the HX Stomp is one of the smallest kind of devices in this class. Difficult to compete with, but the first thing that you might notice is there's quite a lot of knobs on there, 17 knobs. I'm a person who likes to program on the actual device itself. I think that's important because when you come to be playing live, chances are you're not going to necessarily take your laptop along with you to be able to get in and edit things. So I think it makes sense to be able to actually make presets and make adjustments on the actual device itself. It seems well built, it seems pretty solid and stuff. I've got one of the ones without the headphone. The thing that is difficult coming into this as a Helixy person, or a person who's used to real amps as well, is that it's probably the furthest experience from playing with a real amplifier that you could get. So on the one hand, on one side of the spectrum you'd have something like the Iridium, which is literally a plug and play type thing. You've got, minor amounts of adjustments that you can make. So that's been my experience with the Iridium. Generally it responds pretty well to anything you put in front of it, and it's kind of a predictable response, predictable outcome, difficult to get a really bad sound out of. Somewhere in the middle I would say the Kemper and the Helix. There's simplicity in the design, but there's also potential for complexity if you want to get into the menus and stuff. The Headrush gig board, relatively simple again. You don't have pages and pages of amp parameters to scroll through. The FM3 though is completely the other end of that spectrum, to the point that you can go in and you can alter the diodes that are used in a tube screamer, which is kind of a crazy level of granular detail, but as a person new to the Fractal kind of world and stuff, it's pretty overwhelming to start with. So my normal advice, if you're getting a modeler for the first time, or you get your hands on like a Helix or an HX Stomp or a Kemper or anything, but is to try and find a profile or preset that sounds roughly close to what you wanted, or to start from scratch and kind of experiment, well, what would I be using in real life? Okay, I'd use a deluxe reverb with a tube screamer. My advice is to try and build up your presets in that way. Coming from the side of, I prefer my stuff to be kind of natural, not too many effects, like delay, reverb, a drive and an amp is generally what I'm going for. So if you start from that basis, it's not that difficult to find roughly what a unit is capable of, and roughly how kind of amp models respond and how it sounds. The difficulty with the FM3 is starting from scratch is kind of a whole new world of stuff, to the point where you have to link up cables in this kind of stuff. So it's not immediately obvious at all how you're supposed to build a preset. So just in case you didn't know, you've got to start with an input block and you've got an end with an output block, and you've got to join all of that up with cables before you'll get any sound out of the thing. So if you didn't know that, I didn't know that. It took me a while to figure that out, and I also had Kevin talk to help with that. So that's kind of cool. Then when it comes to choosing an amp, you're going to have a massive list, similar to like when you go through the Kemper, you can have like 1,000 profiles. I think you've got kind of loads and loads and loads of amps to choose from. So it's probably best to choose an amp that you're roughly familiar with. That's not exactly what I did, and I'm not sure that I got the best results out of that. But you might have seen earlier on today my kind of first experiments and stuff. So what I've been able to do so far is to put in an amp and put in a cab, put in delay and a reverb, and I'm running it in scenes mode, which is basically equivalent to snapshot mode, roughly. One of the things I do like about the FM3 is you're able to kind of load like channels. So if you imagine that you've got your Helix or whatever normal signal chain, but at any point in there you could switch one of those devices in for another. So you might have like an Eric Johnson type sound, and you've got like a Fender clean amp in the middle of it, and then if you wanted to switch channels, you can literally switch to any other amp without affecting switching presets. Basically you're just switching one aspect. So I really like that as a feature. It's kind of powerful and useful, I think. So I've been able to roughly, set up a lead, and I've experimented through some of the factory presets. How does it sound? Basically it sounds like a modeler, I think. If you're not used to how a modeler sounds, I think you'll be disappointed with an FM3 as much as you'd be disappointed with a Kemper, as much as you'd be disappointed with a Helix. I think once you make the switch, or like the mental switch that a modeler has a sound, you've got like the final kind of produced sound that is happening, recorded with a mic. Once you've made that mental switch, I think it's kind of clear that most modelers sound in a certain ballpark. That might be slightly controversial to say, but that's basically my feeling. I think the major differences between units is actually the signal routing and the process of actually creating presets and patches. I think that's really where the main differences lie between different units, and the kind of user interface, as much as the sounds. The first amp model and preset that I've been really inspired by is the Trainwreck. It's I think the Trainwreck Liverpool, one of the Trainwrecks anyway, which I think is like a modded AC30 kind of sound, which isn't something that I'd normally use necessarily, but since that's what's inspiring me at the moment, that's what I'm going to experiment with and see what happens. But I just wanted to share some of my initial kind of opinions. If you're not a fractal person, I think going into that world, you might be kind of, initially I was anyway, overwhelmed at the kind of options. You know, at every point, like cabinets, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff with, and there's probably like 5 menus or something for pretty much every part of the signal chain. So, you know, you could have on the even a simple drive, like a Timmy emulation, you've got like 3 or 4 menus of stuff that you can alter with that. With the amp, similar, you've got even more. You can change frequency responses of all kinds of different stuff. So I think if you're looking for that kind of, if we kind of accept that this is the basic interface that as guitarists we're used to using, you know, a bass, a middle, a treble, that's kind of the basics and the gain. I think it's quite difficult to view the FM3 in that kind of way. It's almost like we're in a view which is like one layer, like developer, below whatever the general user interface would be. I don't know if that makes sense. Basically, if you imagine you're on an Apple iPhone, the user interface is quite simple. If you want to make changes underlying to the software and stuff, it's quite difficult to get in there. On an Android phone, there's a thing called developer options where you can basically go into developer mode and you can change all kinds of stuff. You know, you can change a screen to black and white. You can simulate color spaces. That's basically what I'm just talking about there, innit? So that's one thing I know you can do anyway. But you can do a lot of stuff with an Android in developer mode. I feel like the FM3 is kind of stuck in that developer mode, where as like a normal kind of user like myself, if I'm just wanting to go in and create patches and, you know, put amps together and drives together and cabs together and delays and reverbs and just try and play those sounds, some of those additional options and deeper surface menus that are kind of right at the top of the surface just because of the way the user interface works, I think that could be potentially a little bit off-putting in some ways and maybe get in the way a bit. I think if we accept like the Iridium is that just that surface layer, you know, you can't go through and edit presence, you can't go through and edit sag, you certainly can't go through and edit the valves that are chosen in the amp, whereas on the FM3 literally all of that is just at the same flat level of interface. So that's kind of one of those things that you've got to get your head around, I guess, if you're new to it. So I'm going to persevere, but that's just my thoughts for today. I'm going to sprinkle in some of my playing with it today, and hopefully there'll be some sounds in there that inspire me. As I say, the Trainwreck is where I'm at the moment, and I'm digging that sound, so that's where I'm going to stay for possibly a couple of days and just try and get my head around the unit a bit more. But I just wanted to put up my actual honest first impressions as someone who's not new to the world of modelling but new to the world of Fractal, and just give my opinions. Hopefully there's something useful in there. If you've got comments, if you're a Fractal person and you've been with these devices for a while, it'd be great to hear your opinions and how you think about like workflow, how you think about putting patches and presets together, and any advice you might have. If you leave that in the comments, that'd be cool for people to read. I think there's going to be people on my channel that are new to the world of Fractal as well, so I guess it's a chance to kind of explore that together. But if this is useful, if you could like and subscribe, that'd be cool, and I'll catch you for another video soon. I just wanted to share my first impressions. Cheers.